we'll really kind of open this up and get everyone's feedback and really engage this as a discussion. So does that sound good?
Thank you for having us.
Well, thank you for being here. We really appreciate it. I know some folks too came from quite a ways on the other side of the city from, and the bus just got here, right? So a little bit of a hectic trip. So hope everyone, thank you for doing that. I know that that's no small feat.
We are recording, and I can edit things out. So if tell your facilitators if you say something and want to not have it on the record, just do that.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. So, yeah, you got me on a 7-second delay because sometimes I just want to use my whole vocabulary. So, okay. Very nice to meet you. No, that's right. You get it. We're waiting. Yeah. Okay. No, all good. So let me actually do this. So we have 3 panelists, and I'll ask them to introduce themselves, and I'll kind of ask you in your remarks to answer maybe 2.5 questions. First, kind of, what are you doing now? What were you doing at the time of Sandy? So kind of the basics. And the other is, what does this question of preparedness and being prepared mean within the context of Sandy, whether going into it, whether coming out of it, but what are your sort of initial thoughts related to that? So Heather, do you want to kick us off here?
Sure. So during Sandy, I was working in emergency management for Kelly. I was a program manager at the time, but during Sandy, that activation, I was the EOC manager, and throughout the activation, Emergency Operations Center. So emergency management is the coordinating agency for the city. And so we help bring all the agencies together to help come together and help coordinate everyone to help manage the response. So we also have the city's coastal storm plan and oversee that. So I was helping with that during Sandy. And so during Sandy, part of my role spun out and helped with food and water and recovery and some canvassing efforts before working more on the resiliency long-term work after that. Since then, I've built out more of the resiliency portfolio at EM, and I'm still there today.
Great to have you here. Tavina, am I saying your name right?
Yes, you are.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I was wondering, do you mind introducing yourself and talking a little bit about what preparedness means, kind of in the context of Sandy and really the great work that your group is doing?
I'm Tavina Willis. I'm the Community Organizing Manager for Rise Up Initiative. And what that means is I'm sort of like I manage our public housing campaigns. So what resiliency means, since said the preparation for Sandy, we weren't prepared for Sandy. So that I don't really have a good answer for. The situation taught us that we needed to be prepared for Superstorm Sandy and other events or issues that have faced us or that have caused us to be without a lot of resources at one time. Like our electricity or not having water, not having use of our elevators, things like that.
Thank you for being here today. Kelly, do you want to take us home in the first question here?
Yeah, I was a city official at the time, and I see a lot of folks at Salkin and others that worked in city government at that time. And as an emergency manager, it was our job to do the preparing in essence. And just to sort of cast your mind back. I started there in February of 2006. February of 2006 was about 6 months after August 28, 2005, which was when Hurricane Katrina made landfall in New Orleans. And that incident and what happened in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina made landfall had an enormous impact on New York City and city government and the mayor and the mayor's office and our office. But at the same time, it was 2005, it was 4 years after 9/11, so this city was still reeling from that other catastrophe, which was the World Trade Center attacks. And so it was a very challenging time for us. And there's a couple of words that people are using today, which I think are so super important. One is consciousness. What was the consciousness around the threat of something like Hurricane Sandy? What happens after you have something of the magnitude of 9/11 is everyone sort of thinks that the only threat you have now is a terror threat. And so trying to wrap people's minds around this concept of a hurricane was enormously difficult. we got together with the mayor's office and others, and they said, look, look at what's happening in New Orleans. That cannot happen in New York City. We need to have the best coastal storm plan anywhere in the world. And so they gave us the resources, and they committed the government of the city of New York to that. And we made a lot of progress. But, it was difficult, again, because when you talk to people and you say, look, this is the hurricane plan. I need your agency to do X, Y, and Z. And they would say, we don't get hurricanes in New York. What are you talking about? Because the last hurricane we had in New York was in 1938. It was called the Long Island Express. So 1938, 2008, that's what, 70 years. So people said, we don't get hurricanes in New York. They're like, why are we preparing for a terror threat? We're like, well, we are, but we need to think about more about this. I mean, there was a hurricane plan, but Katrina, again, made us understand that it wasn't big enough. It wasn't impactful enough. It didn't integrate into the neighborhoods enough. And so we made a tremendous amount of progress in that time, from 2006 all the way to 2011. And in 2011, I don't know if you remember, but in August 2011, we had another hurricane called Irene. And Irene was a pretty massive Cat 2 that was right on its way to us. We activated the Emergency Operations Center. We evacuated all of the hospitals in Zone A. We set up our entire emergency shelter system. We did all of the we exercised all of the pieces of the coastal storm plan, which is all those enormous moving parts. And then Irene sort of it did this strange thing. The back of it fell off, and it sort of went over the top of us, and it devastated upstate New York, but kind of left New York City a bit unscathed. And everybody said, "Wow, is that a hurricane? Is that how a hurricane works? I love this, right?" So then when Hurricane Sandy started to point at us a year later, everybody said, these hurricanes, they're easy. We don't have a problem here. So anyway, that's the long-winded introduction to life.
No, that's great. I'm going to ask a follow-up and then really kind of open it up. And I think each of you has addressed this a little bit. I know we're sort of adjusting. So I used to do theater, and theater in the round, one where you're in the middle and people are all around you, always sounds like such a great idea, and then you're always constantly trying to find your focus. So appreciate everyone's improvisation with the setup in the day. No, but my question is, and I think each of you has already started sort of talking down this path, is let me back up a little bit. So Kelly, you mentioned, post 9/11, a lot of disaster preparedness was focused on terrorism, right? Intentional acts. Hurricane Katrina hit, and at least nationally, it was sort of like this, oh yeah, we also have these other disasters that hit. So every time something hits, it sort of shifts our consciousness and kind of shifts what we know, and we see things that are exposed that maybe weren't part of the planning before.
Coronavirus is a good example.
Yeah, COVID, yeah. Heather, maybe I'll start with you, working with NICEM in an emergency management, kind of what are some of those changes that you've seen kind of coming from Sandy sort of being carried forward? What are some of the biggest shifts that you've seen sort of in this notion of preparedness?
We're always, I think as emergency managers, always fighting the last disaster. As Kelly said, that's always what people, we're always going to be challenged with, because we have to think flexible, scalable, and our job is always to think about everything that could happen. And so I think Kelly was on point, is that we were really in that space post 9/11. But after Sandy, certainly I always say preparedness came out of 9/11 and resiliency came out of Sandy. And so in that disaster cycle, and I really think after Sandy, resiliency really got on everyone's agenda, and really talking about prevention and a lot of we can't have this happen again, and the loss and devastation, and starting to think about the rebuilding effort. And so with that, and I think that was a big part of what I saw a lot come out of that. And then in the preparedness realm, just in terms of really education and how to really think about how we, there's nothing more than going through something that really hits home, and then really bringing it into the community and the community buy-in. I think the challenge we always have in government is people are going to listen to us in a certain way, but when you have your community go in and are able to echo that message, that really carries so much further. And so I think we've been able to have a lot more advancement in that space in Sandy, and being able to have a lot more outreach there too, and bring a lot more tools and ability to bring that in.
A lot more community to it. Wonderful, yeah. Tavita, I know you talked a little bit about this too. Now the Red Hook Initiative, that was kind of created post-Sandy?
No, Red Hook Initiative has been we're in our 20th year anniversary. So, the program, Red Hook Local Leaders, that was started post-Sandy.
Okay.
To prepare public housing residents, in particular, for these kind of natural disaster events. I think what happens is when emergencies happen that affect the city, urban areas and public housing developments, lower income communities, we tend to get overlooked when it comes to resources and our infrastructure, preparing our infrastructure and preparing our communities for a disaster such as Sandy. After Sandy is when we learned that we needed buildings to be
sort of meet this need. I know we had a lot of folks here coming from those affected communities. Sorry, I didn't it's like me at the dinner table. My sister's left-handed, and so we have to like but I'm curious if folks here, I'd love to hear a little bit from your perspective as well too. How did your sense of preparedness, or what does preparedness mean sort of in a post-Sandy context? Anyone, please.
Well, I was not prepared. I had my grandchildren over that night. Looking at TV, all of a sudden saw blinking. And my son looked at the window, Mom, there's a whole lot of water is coming through, like fouling up, going over the car. I said to myself, what am I going to do to protect my seeds? So that night I stayed up all night, watching over them. I was 60 years old, taking insulin, we didn't worry about that. So the next morning, I had my brother-in-law come down and get them, but I stayed. I stayed because I wanted to see, walk out there and see the disaster, what had happened, and try to get to help somebody, help anybody out there. It was just unbelievable what I see.
Yeah. And I think I'm sorry, please go ahead. No, I was just gonna say I appreciate that point too, and I know sometimes I work in an academic institution. We can look at disaster theory, but then to see it with your own eyes, that's such a powerful thing. It's such a powerful trigger for, and why we see such amazing organizations to kind of emerge or extend what they do in a disaster. Yeah, but did you want to add something?
Yeah, so of course, nobody in the waterfront areas were prepared. Red Hook wasn't really, you weren't prepared. After a lot of resilient work came out, a lot of the non-for-profit had created this Red Hook Coalition, and we all worked together to start having OEM come out and give preparedness notebooks and book bags so that residents know like what to keep in his bag in case of emergencies. And then we did this big event where we had to we connected with the local businesses and the churches in the neighborhood where they had space to store canned foods, or like IKEA, they had covers and coats and stuff. So we were able to hand out like these passports and make it seem like, okay, this is an emergency, this is what's happening, go. And you had to go to each of these stations to get a case of emergency, but it was also for, remember that? It was also for, to remind us that these are actual stations that we set up, that we connected with. We created these stations, so in case of another storm, these are the places you can go in case, if you can't get on a bus and leave, or if you can't leave your home, you can go to IKEA because they are up high and they have areas where you can stay. They have beds that they can put out for you. So that was also made, but not only did we get hit with Sandy, but then we turned around and got hit with a snowstorm.
That's right. Yeah.
A nor'easter.
Uh-huh.
So a lot of us during that nor'easter, like I live in Red Hook West, which we have the only tall housing project, 3 tall buildings in the community, and I live on the 8th floor, so I walk. We don't have building windows, so we were walking in pitch black, dark upstairs.
Yeah.
We had no heat, we had no hot water, no electricity. So I was walking every day from the 8th floor down to RHI to help cook with oatmeal, and then coming back up 8 flights, and then we got hit with the storm, and we still had no heat. And it took 14 days, probably a little longer before OEM or anyone from city agencies came into our community. So we as a community came together on our own. And we helped each one of us. So by the time the agencies did come in, to us, we felt like all they needed to do was pick up where we already started. And so that, that was my take on Sandy. It also, I feel like, caused a lot of PTSD. When you hear that, you think military, but no, it's post-traumatic stress because we're up 2 blocks from the water. And the water came up as far as the 2nd floor in a 14-story building. And so that is stress that we carry with us until this day, amongst everything else. And the fact that we were left out and no one showed up, just showed us that we had to depend on ourselves. So,
I appreciate you sharing that as well too, and especially some of the triggers for this, because it's something that's very, very real and not necessarily talked about enough in terms of the long-term sort of trauma that's caused. And whether it's flooding or water rushing, it was out to California where they had the wildfires, and for them it's the wind. When the wind blows really hard, and a lot of times it's a trigger for folks. So, did you want to add something?
I just wanted to add to the fact that I live in Coney Island, and thanks Redhook for offering us the ride in today. But I'm going to say no, we weren't definitely prepared for Sandy. I live right on with Coney Island Creek, and we were under the impression that the water rose from the ocean, but it did not. It rose from the creek, and came on like a tub running over onto the and some people left, and that was one good thing that NYCHA did provide buses to help people leave the area. But there's 50,000 people in Coney Island, and NYCHA is not the only housing there. So there are private houses, there's seniors, whatever, and we weren't prepared. Yeah. So, and we weren't prepared, but I hear you guys talking about OEM, but just yesterday, OEM and the agency that I'm a part of, Coney Island Beautification Project, ran the 10-year anniversary of Sandy. And I'm proud to say on all the national channels today, we see all the aftermath of having the children come out. Over 250 children came out to help plant on the tree beds. OEM giving out flood barriers. The commissioner of OEM, my name was there. Yeah, was there. And it showed us that we are a little better prepared to know what's needed, but we're far from being prepared. We're far, all of the agencies that's helping us to prepare for the next disaster is realizing now that you're still a disaster behind, that climate change continues, but we're still preparing. By preparing for the next, we're still maybe two disasters behind to really be up to par with what we should be prepared. We did have all the full bag preparedness and whatever. But we're happy to say that when we hear the little children were able to say, we care about Coney Island. That was what I got out of the day yesterday, when the little kids said, we care about Coney Island, and they weren't even born when Sandy happened. One kid said, we realized that it happened, it was a big flood, and he knows that that's what It wasn't what he remembered, it's what he's learned. And they were able to do plantings, and that's when our group organized. And we organized from the mental state of people that we needed to do something just about the mental state. But since then, we have grown to understand that we have to do much more than just help the people to get to beautify the neighborhood. And we've learned how that we need to have better skills and whatever, and we learn from that. So I just want us to think about the fact that to be better prepared for the next disaster, we must jump forward several disasters ahead to understand where we have to be.
It's a really, really great point. Thank you for that. Did you want to add something?
Yeah, I heard the other day, picking up on that, I heard the other day, two things. One person said, too often in life, we're fighting the last war. We should be preparing for the next war. And pointed out that, in fact, heat disaster has killed more New Yorkers than Sandy and 9/11. Well, not 9/11, but certainly Sandy and Ida, which was last year.
On an annual basis.
And we need to, and that we need to be thinking about that. The other thing that someone said, which I thought was really arresting, was that the tagline in Miami in disaster preparedness is the first 72 is up to you.
Yeah.
Which is to say that we all need to be prepared in our homes, but in our communities with the insulin, with the what are you going to do with your kids, with having water and food. And so one of the things that I also, full disclosure, I work for the city. I've been working on housing recovery. I was very interested in them because my background coming into the city was working with nonprofit organizations and community organizations. The city had a delay in its ability to reach out to. Red Hook was actually in some ways much better prepared because you had the initiative already in place, so you knew a lot of you knew your neighbors, and the city had a way to reach out to an organization. Many other parts of the city were not as.
But we did a lot of yelling.
And that's not too bad.
No, we honestly did, because I didn't know about Red Hook Initiative.
Yeah.
Right.
I started out as someone going in just to charge my phone.
Exactly.
And neighbors' phones, and I was like, oh wow, y'all are giving out a Buterol?
And
I'm
they
like,
knew
our
that.
battery operated on nebulizer,
Right.
and I've never seen one of those. And I had 4 neighbors in my building that I personally knew that were asthmatics, and they couldn't get up and down the steps.
And so the question, and it's actually kind of genius, right? And the city also used the public library system, in Queens
Yes.
particularly. There were libraries, and the Rockaway Library happened to be at a bit of an uphill, so it had a working generator. And so we put things there because we knew people would come to it. So as you think about preparing for the next disaster, what are the group, and whether it's Coney, Red Hook, there are tons of communities that have these, Arbor and whatever, but what are the, sort of thinking about the future, so the next type of disaster, but also how have you worked to build those networks, and what are the tools that either that you're using and that you think the city could help with? Not that, I am certainly not, I don't have a direct line to the mayor, nor do I have a line to the Office of Management and Budget, but what are the things that we should be thinking about to come? Because I think what we all know is we all can't do everything. How do we complement each other?
Honestly, I think I agree with the first 72 hours are on us, is because to put the human side to these the bad disasters is that I used to be a city worker, so that means city workers are people. They live in houses. A lot of city workers live in public housing. People who run the city, our civil servants, were affected by these things too. So if there's a flooding in the neighborhood, they can't get to work to help us. That's why the first 72 hours are critical and why no one could get to us, because some of them were messed up or worse off than some of us. I would suggest, honestly, I don't know why every city, state, or federal agency does not have a huge community liaison team. There's always one community liaison person for the entire borough, which is one person to cover a borough is overwhelming for any office. I don't care what the salary is. Like and I used to be a community liaison. Like you have to have one person either like by city council district or per development or give them certain developments based on the district. But every agency that governs this city and operates this city should have community liaisons, preferably people from the community. These are the people who will door knock. These are the people who can speak for the office. I was speaking at a panel like this maybe 4 years ago and speaking about our experience, and someone from Homeland Security came up to me and said, gosh, we didn't know you all had that issue in Red Hook. We have a whole volunteer department that could have came out and helped all of you. And I'm like, I thought you guys just dealt with terrorism. So knowledge of how all of our agencies work, which are part of our resiliency and our leadership development in Red Hook, is like we teach our residents and we teach our neighbors how our city works, our city, who is in our city agencies, the org charts, like how they operate and who do we contact when we have a need. Because if we don't know how we are governed and how we operate, we won't know who to go to. Or we'll go to the wrong place, ask for something, and we'll get the runaround. But having community folks that connect us to these agencies is, I think, it would be a dire investment. And having some sort of volunteer for each agency, city, federal, and state. All need to have someone that connects directly to the ground.
And can I ask just go ahead,
please, yeah, go ahead, and then we have a hand up here too, but go ahead, please.
Sorry,
No, please, go ahead.
You read.
Share your thought.
I just want to amend what Tamina said about the agencies, and I'm going to talk about academia. That the data and that you guys gather and put together, I think that you have to have a bridge to the community, to the community to understand that you understand the data and whatever, but you have to explain it to the community, and with the understanding that people from the community can understand, their observation is on point, and that if you tell me something, what you came up with, the data that you came up with, come up with the idea, come to us with the opinion that we can understand as adults that you're explaining something. And if you explain it correctly, part of your role is to explain it correctly so we can understand it, and we will understand.
Yep.
So I just wanted to add that.
I appreciate that. I would even take it a step further, because a lot of times what we do is we say, here's our data and here's what we should do with it. And the step that's missing is to say, work with the community and say, here's our data. What do you think we should do? What do you think should be done with this? And that's a really, really critical part that we don't have a great history of doing well, but appreciate that comment. It's very, very true. Let me hit right back here. I'll come to you next, Kevin.
I'm Tom. During Hurricane Sandy, I actually was in the mayor's office, in the Office of Long-Term Planning and Sustainability. And I, like many, I lived in northern Manhattan, and it took me Sandy plus 2 days to actually be able to get to Cabinet Plaza to the Emergency Operations Center. Over time after that, worked on the SIRR and the Mayor's Office of Resiliency for about a decade.
Sorry, SIRR.
Strategic Initiative for Recovery and Resiliency. This was this was the team put together by Mayor Bloomberg in response immediately after Hurricane Sandy to deal with disaster relief, disaster recovery funds, etc. I learned a lot of things. We've had a lot of frustrations. I was among many trying to champion taking all the lessons learned, the influx of all the help, the information from all the communities, to put it into, my kind of coy term was, a plan in a box,
to take all the lessons learned. We overcame so many hurdles. No, so we as a city were not prepared in a lot of ways. The interrelationship and the coordination among agencies for a city as large and complicated as New York is really weird and fraught and difficult. The honeymoon moment of a disaster compels us all to drop our guards and to throw away a lot of impediments to come to work together. To my knowledge, Liz and Heather will correct me if this has come together better since my time in the mayor's office, but we actually lost an opportunity to use this brain trust that rallied together, that came together to learn all of these things, to figure out how to do things to overcome impediments, and to create that plan in the box. I don't think we succeeded in that, at least not in my time. I learned a lot of things. By the way, just what made me want to raise my hand was I discovered a lot of resources that we have that I wasn't aware of before Sandy. I am now a member of CERT. Does everybody, who knows, are y'all members? Do you guys know about CERT?
No, we haven't even taken, but we know we're familiar with CERT.
Honest, I'm promoting this. I'm going to put in a shameless plug right now. Y'all go look up CERT, sign up for it, take the training.
Tell what it stands for.
Citizens Emergency Response Team.
Community.
Sorry. It's community, so it starts with the letter C, community.
Emergency response.
Starts with community, is what we're talking about here. It is basic, they have, it's a host of training. The main thing, the basic training is disaster preparedness across the whole menu of the things that come at us. It is community in that it's your neighbors, it's your community. You get basic training. You can also take, a whole bunch of other training. They teach you about radios. They teach you about who are your neighbors. How do you respond? You're there as first line of support underneath the first responders. You're not going to go run into a flaming building, but you might be asked by the fire department to go help manage traffic down the corner. And you know who your neighbors are. You understand what go bag is. You know how to put it together. I'm a big promoter of that. I'm a fan at this point. So please do that.
Great resource. Thank you for sharing as well too. Appreciate that. Did you want to add something?
Yeah, just kind of to thread a little bit on preparedness and what we've been hearing here. So, I mean, just the one thing I'm just thinking about, talking about kind of our messaging that we used to have at emergency management about preparedness. It used to be, especially pre-Sandy or pre-Irene, was have a plan, have a go bag, know where you're going to go, or how you're going to stay informed. But it was also like know where you're going to go is really about the no notice event, like near and far, if something goes boom, like down the block, down in another borough, and obviously that was more for those no notice events. But know your evacuation zone, and it was like have a go bag. But it was really simple, kind of like these really simple preparedness messages. I think after what we're talking a lot about right now was after Sandy, we saw how much the community coming together was such a big part of of just everything, and like the recovery, the piece of it, but it's that foundation of having that community network and having that in place ongoing is so much part of if that foundation's there, that makes you prepared for the next disaster. And I think COVID had really solidified that, and we all saw that. Citywide was having those community networks was such a big part of how we all sustained everything throughout the pandemic. In terms of just having every part of our community, every part of being able to provide services between testing, vaccines, being able to build the social infrastructure, the communication, education, every part of support at your community level. So it's been amazing kind of to watch that happen citywide, not just in the kind of the flood zone or the areas that were impacted in a certain geography of the city, but coming out of 2021, 2020, where that is now. And so that social infrastructure, social resiliency, I think has become this really big part of preparedness as well. And so I think it's happening right now. We're kind of just make a plug for something at EM is we do have this program called Strengthening Communities, Strengthening Communities through Recovery. I think it's happening actually at the same time, but we are doing a program now where we're giving communities, it's kind of like seed money to create where we give an umbrella organization basically money to hire basically staff to create their own preparedness plan with their community members. And so that is basically, so essentially and that's the biggest part, is getting the community resources. That's always been the biggest gap. And then with the program also does have ongoing resources that are given to them. And the concept is that also then that community group is someone that's available to us that if an event happens, they also can be available for canvassing operations and to help us time out in an emergency. So that's a new program that we've pushed out since post item.
New insights, new resources. It's great. Yeah, Kelly.
And just to add to that, I think the city is really, as Heather said, the city is learning a lot, and emergency managers in general are learning a lot about what kinds of tools to put in front of people. But in my experience, it goes back to that idea of consciousness. So, and you talked about the data, and if we gathered you all before Sandy and we gave you all this data, and we gave you these tools, you would walk out and you'd say, I'm going to do it. I'm going to get my family. I'm going to write a plan, and you'd all be super jazzed. And then, and then you'd walk out into the street, and your day would hit you, and you'd get pulled into all the other things that you have to deal with day in and day out, and it's hard, man. It's hard. And so the missing piece is these stories that you guys are telling. I mean, these very powerful stories. You talked about. You're watching TV with your grandkids, you look out the way, you see that water rising, you're thinking, I could die right now. I could literally die right here. That's the piece that's gonna get people, I think, over that hump, to actually do something and prepare. But you need that moment of truth where you're thinking, because I think people have a hard time really, Davina talked about, sitting there and nobody's coming. I think that's the other thing. People are like, oh, government's going to come, people are going to come, and then you're like, they're not coming. So,
sorry to interrupt you folks. Sorry. We need 2 people from this room to report back in the main session in about 15 minutes. So try to wrap up in the next few minutes. Great. Thanks.
Great. A little piece of logistics, and then I'll do one final kind of rapid fire question really for everyone. Is there anyone who wants to step up and just kind of give a summary of what we talked about?
I nominate
at
you.
the beginning.
No.
I'm happy to go up with whoever as well too. I don't know if it necessarily should be me, but I got your back if you want. Yeah. Other.
I spoke yesterday. No, that was a no.
Okay.
One of my local leaders
Someone in here, it doesn't necessarily have to be on the panel.
that took my class on leaders.
I'll pull. Heather, do you mind if I pull you?
Okay.
Okay,
Yes.
I'll pull you. All right. I got you back. All right, great. Okay, wonderful. So in the remaining 2-3 minutes, I'll do kind of a lightning round question. And what I'll do is kind of open it up to the group and then conclude with the panel. But the question is, we've talked a lot about some really amazing, really important things here. And I in my head, I keep wanting to jump in, and then someone else jumps in and says it's something awesome. It's just really just the importance of community and just the connections and all of that. Let me just say that there is a lot of data to support that as well too. So we know it with our hearts, we know it with our experience, we know it with the data as well too. And so I'm happy to work with folks on kind of bringing that together. But my question is, what are we not talking about enough? Or what are we not talking about that we should be talking about? Let's just go ahead and I know we don't have time to get into all of that, but let's put a stake in the ground and say, are there things that we're not talking about that we should be? Or are there things that we've mentioned but we should be talking more about? So let me put the audience first, and then we'll conclude with the panel students, please.
So the fact that it's getting hotter.
Yeah.
A lot of places, Red Hook lost 480 something trees.
Yeah.
And so now Red Hook has become a hot box.
Yeah.
It's going to get hotter. We need to figure out a way to some type of prevention plan to figure out what do we do.
Yeah.
Because what happens is it overheats, knocks out the grid. What do we do then?
Yeah. Great point. Yeah. Were you going to?
Yeah, I'll say something. I feel like she was talking about the trees, but it's also about the construction around the area. So it's hard for us to breathe. And they have a lot of elderly, so I feel like there should be places, and God forbid there is a heat wave or whatever, it's cooling centers, which we don't have in Red Hook.
Yeah.
So I feel like every, either Coney Island, wherever it is that you have your borough, should have at least one destination place where people like elderly can go if they have health issues, just to go in and cool off.
Yeah, and I'm also hearing this thing with the trees, with the building, that there are other policies that are affecting this too. Yeah, did you want to add something?
Yeah, it's kind of tangential to what has been said, which, by the way, thank you to everyone who has with a really inviting experience. But when we talk about data, and I'm also a researcher, and I've been very lucky to work with communities or organizations even before the data is ready to be presented, kind of to work out what question do we really want to ask to the world. And I think that's also important. But I think that data has a huge trust component, and in the context of emergency preparedness in New York, with what has been going on with the back and forth with the preliminary FEMA maps that were in development before Sandy hit, and then Sandy hit, and then the maps came out and they were questioned, and now they are expected to come out in 24.
They keep changing.
They keep changing. So there was one time that I presented one of the simplest data sets I've ever worked with, which is the 10 evac centers in New York City. And the community that I was working with here in Harlem looked at them and said, those are bullshit. Like, it's good to know where they are, but I'm not going there. I don't think we can all fit in there. I once tried to find one and it was closed. So data is more than an Excel spreadsheet, and that's a huge bridge.
And I love that point too on just the origins of the questions. If it's meant to impact the community, some of those questions should be designed from those questions too. Really great point. Maybe one or two more, and then we'll hit the panel, and then we'll get our applause in here, and we'll make them jealous.
I help staff an evacuation center downtown in Manhattan, and you're right. People don't expect the evacuation center to be stood up, but it's a place to go and then get evacuated, not a shelter in place. There's a little bit of terminology. Data is hard to collect. I know you have a lot of great data now, but it's always increasingly harder and harder to get. When you got people coming in, flooding the doors, you're not going to go and sit down and write down their ages and everything else. It's going to be a challenge no matter what. So I hope that data is also looked at a lens with what's not there and what point in time that data was taken, so that there's more context that people can be comfortable with that data, so they can trust it.
Yeah, great point. I always like to say too, data only tells you what it tells you. It doesn't tell you all of the other stuff. Yeah. One more here, and then we'll go down the panel.
I'm Anne. I write about climate and environment for the Times, and I live on the edge of Red Hook, and I thinking about a lot of this stuff and talking to a lot of frontline folks in a bunch of neighborhoods recently. And this is so amazing to hear this agency community dialogue here. I guess the question I have is, even today, the phrase strengthening communities, you mentioned you have a program called that, it still sounds a little bit like a one-way thing, like OEM is going to come and strengthen the community, whereas what we're hearing here and what everybody's saying is that it's more like, and people are finding similar things about the design of resiliency. So like, instead of coming to the community with something that's already kind of half-baked, like the community has to be involved like from the very beginning. That's what I'm hearing from everybody. So is there a specific change in the way OEM is doing things, for instance, that would bake that in to processes and plans and
Yes, come to 1:30 sessions in the communities, and I'll share it.
I would love to. I would love to.
Great.
So, for example, OEM comes to Red Hook and facilitates workshops in our community and tells us about heat emergencies and different other types of emergencies that can impact our community. They've been doing it for like the last 10 years.
And at the same time, they're hearing from you and taking your ideas seriously.
Yeah.
But
So having that kind of
just yesterday, speaking out from, they came to Coney Island for the community organized hosting of the Sandy Commemorative Day of Service. And they came along. So I just want to add to, when you make your presentation, to applaud some of the work that's gone on for the last 10 years. And that we're here, we're listening, and we're a group of people who are pleased to remain alive and learn as much as has been learned in the last 10 years. And I'm willing to share. So I don't think that we should doom and gloom and downgrade the people. I think the people should be applauded for what we've learned through the years. And I'm ready to take my bow.
Great. So with that, I know we're at time. Let me just ask very quickly, anything from the panelists, anything else that hasn't been said that you really just want to...
The comments and were so terrific, and you said, you know, we have to think 1, 2, 3, 4 steps ahead. And I'm looking around at all the gray hairs in the room, and, you know, we know that the job we plan for is not the job we're gonna get. We need to think about what's the next thing that we're not thinking about. That's our job.
Yeah.
There's been a lot said. I agree with everything here. So.
Wonderful, fantastic.
I would say that something that hasn't been mentioned is talking to your neighbors. The last 10 years from Sandy, when Sandy happened, I didn't really know a lot of people in my neighborhood. Only spoke to a couple of people in my building. And since then, I know a lot of people, and you don't have to be friends with somebody to help them in an emergency, right? Like, if your gas is out, you don't have to be that person's friend to knock on their door and say, hey, is your gas out too? So talking to your neighbors, even if you all are not friendly, or even if you don't speak the same language, gas out, lights, electricity, health emergency, there's keywords we can say to each other that we can help and share, and old rules share information. When you leave here, take this information back home, back to your neighbors, back to your building, and every time we have a meeting and every time we have an info session, take that information and share it with somebody else. That's really how we all ended up here today, because we all shared information, we all took classes together, and this is how we ended up here.
Wonderful. Yeah, no, great point to conclude on. Lots of great conversations to continue, but let's give our panelists kind of give yourself